Pupco Studios in Oklahoma City. You're watching The Press Row. I'm Jenny Carlson here with Barry Trammell, and we're brought to you by Papa John's Pizza. Go online anytime to papajohns.com and order your pizza. It's time for Inbox, your email questions answered here on video. Let's get right to it with a question from Joe. He says, if you lose one or more game in college football, there are all sorts of criteria: quality wins or losses, strength of schedule, strength of conference, eye test. But Florida State seems largely exempt because they have a 0 on one side of the ledger and a little boost by being the defending champs. They should be judged like other teams. What about that, Barry?
You know what? It's an excellent point in that when a team's undefeated, you sort of think, forget their resume. They need to be up there near the top, maybe not at the top, and they're not ranked number 1. They're number 3. But you think, you can't exclude them. So it's a very good point. I would argue this, though. Once you get past maybe Oregon and Alabama, everybody starts bunching together. The truth of the matter is Florida State's quality wins are pretty equal to Mississippi State's. I mean, Mississippi State beat LSU, Auburn, A&M. But those 3 teams have sort of fallen. They're not as good of a win as they seemed at the time. Right. Florida State's wins sort of the same way. The big difference is Florida State hasn't stumbled. Mississippi State did. Now, it was at Alabama. But I guess the point is, if all other things being equal, which I think Florida State, Mississippi sort of are, and along with Baylor, Ohio State, TCU, you give the edge to the unbeaten.
Yeah, and I think, too, Joe brings up the idea of being the defending champions. And frankly, I think if Florida State, even if they weren't the defending champs, being in a Power 5 conference, even if it's not the greatest, because the ACC clearly has its weaknesses, a lot of them. In fact, most of the teams you would count as weaknesses. Still, a Power 5 conference, I think any undefeated team in any of those conferences, whether it's the Big 12, the Pac-12, Big 10, SEC obviously, but any Power 5 conference, if you go undefeated, I think you're going to be in the top 4. And maybe that right now is frustrating because you might say, well, does Florida State really belong in there? Well, at some point it may help your team. So I think being in one of those power conferences, you get some benefit of the doubt, and I think you're going to be in the top 4 if you go undefeated. All right, back to the inbox. This one's from Bill. He says, the OU-Kansas weather was not favorable for anybody's passing game. The offensive coordinator needs to forget about a balanced attack. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think Cody Thomas will be just fine. By the way, I think Josh Heupel did forget about a balanced attack against Kansas.
There was nothing balanced about it. The OU quit passing, especially in the second half, but even in the first half. I will say this, though. Sooners can't forget about the throwing game. They can't stop worrying about Cody Thomas's passing if he's going to be the quarterback here while Trevor Knight is out for this reason. Kansas, Texas Tech, Iowa State, they're not on the schedule every week. You can run wild on those teams, but sometimes you play a TCU, and sometimes you play a Baylor, and sometimes you play a K-State. And you got to be able to deliver the ball on target frequently against those kinds of teams. Sooners should handle Oklahoma State fine in Bedlam. But then comes a bowl game. If Cody Thomas is the quarterback in a bowl game, Sooners won't be able to just pound it for 400 yards. They're going to have to make some passes. They're going to have a good passing game plan in that game. Cody Thomas is going to have to deliver.
I saw that passing attack personally. I was at the OU-Kansas game, and while the conditions were rough, that's exactly right. They were not good, and you saw high throws, and you saw low throws, and you saw stuff that you thought, well, maybe that's a product of that. But then I watched OSU at Baylor, and you know what? It was raining there too. It was raining hard, and you saw both quarterbacks there have some success throwing the ball. So I think to give Cody Thomas a pass, Josh Heupel a pass, you can't do it. Now, they had something going with Samaje Perine that they needed to just keep handing him the ball because Kansas wasn't stopping him. Their offensive line was powering through. They were getting great push. Just keep giving the ball to Perine in that situation. But to say that just because the conditions were bad, that's what happened. I think we saw some guys on Saturday night throw the ball well in the rain. You got to think Cody Thomas has got to be better throwing the ball. All right, back to the inbox. Steve says, I think a lot of credit should be given to Dax Garman. The young man did a great job when he was protected. I'm not sure we will ever know how good Dax could really be. An interesting point here, Barry.
Well, it is. It is an interesting point and worth discussing. He was good in those 2 non-conference games against Missouri State, Texas San Antonio, and even very effective against Texas Tech. But we've pretty well established that Texas Tech has an awful defense. So I think Dax Garman, it was unfortunate for him that he played behind an offensive line that couldn't protect him. But the truth of the matter is he was not mobile. He could not make the quick throws to get the relief necessary. One game of Mason Rudolph was enough for me to say, hey, Mason Rudolph clearly is better than Dax Garman. So I don't think it's, I think you're right. I think we don't know how good Dax Garman can be, but we do know how good he is. He's not as good as Mason Rudolph.
Yeah, I would say that's true. And I think the thing that Dax Garman fell shortest on was that intermediate stuff. It just wasn't consistent enough. And you as much as people loved the deep passing, and I loved it too because it was exciting, something to sort of get you on the edge of your seat, you really can't build your entire offense around that. It just doesn't work. You got to have that intermediate stuff that makes the offense really go, that gets the wide receivers such a strength at OSU, gets them into the flow of the game, uses them in space, gets to that area of strength. And Garman just wasn't consistently effective enough with those passes. Now, was he running a little scared? Was he throwing a little quick? Was he, not comfortable in the pocket because of some of the pressure he'd faced? I have no doubt that there's some of those things that are true. So I think, what was said about maybe not knowing if Garman was that good or how good he was, I think that's solid. But he had to be better in those situations, especially with that intermediate and short stuff. And we just didn't see it consistently enough out of him. All right, lastly, one more time to the inbox. Craig says, I guess Scott Brooks will be the fall guy, but Sam Presti hasn't impressed me either. Where's all the strategic building he talks about? The Spurs could lose Parker and Duncan and still win.
Well, the last point is true, but it's also true that the Spurs are not built around stars. Every other team in the NBA is. Take Blake Griffin, Chris Paul off the Clippers, they're going south. Take Dwight Howard, James Harden off the Rockets, they're going south. Take LeBron, Kyrie Irving off the Cavs, they're nowhere to be found. So the Thunder is no different than any other team. You lose your two best players and you're sunk. It's just to which degree you're sunk. The question about what has Sam Presti put in the pieces to supply at this kind of urgency. The answer is you can't plan for this. Mm-hmm. And what's killed the Thunder as much as anything, Jackie O, is this. It's not just Durant and Westbrook were out, but Durant's replacement was out. Perry Jones, he had the 3 games before he was injured, he averaged 23 points a game and shot over 50% from the field. Then he goes out. Now the Thunder's playing a third teamer. So, Andre Roberson misses some games. Anthony Morrow misses some games. The problem wasn't just Durant and Westbrook. It was the cataclysmic plague that hit the Thunder. So just get those guys back. I think Sam's done an excellent job putting this roster together. None of this falls on Sam Presti.
Yeah, it's hard all the way around. There's definitely, people want to see more, they want to see better, but, it's impossible to have planned to get to this point and to think that you're going to be down to, what were they down to, 7 players at one point? Nobody expects that to happen. Had they lost just, as Barry said, Westbrook and Durant, it wouldn't have been pretty, but you would have had some options. You would have had guys that, would have looked comfortable in end-game scenarios, and instead, you got Andre Roberson taking a 3 at the end to try to win a game against a really good Warriors team. That's not going to work. Now, maybe that falls on Scott Brooks, but the personnel that you've got, it's impossible to think that you were going to have all of these guys go down and have to be faced with such dire situations. They're coming back. It's going to happen eventually. Everybody hang in there. You just got to hope the Thunder hasn't dug themselves in too deep of a hole to get back out and get to the playoffs. It's going to be tough. They're going to have to win a lot of games the rest of this season. Hey, be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.